The house looked untouched, almost staged. A lamp burned in the corner of the living room, throwing a pale rectangle of light across a velvet couch. On the counter sat a bag of groceries, milk sweating through cardboard, greens gone limp. Upstairs the bed was made. Closet doors ajar but nothing missing, and yet the silence was wrong. It was broken only by the dog. A wiry terrier clawed at the doorframe, pacing circles, nails scraping wood in frantic rhythm. It wasn't hunger, it wasn't boredom. It was something closer to grief, though no one recognized it at first. The animal was waiting for a woman who wasn't coming home. Emma Whitfield, 31, real estate broker to the rich. Polished smile, glass of champagne always in hand. Instagram curated like a lifestyle magazine. A townhouse that gleamed with money old enough to carry weight but new enough to draw envy. And then, without warning, she was gone. The neighbor called it in. She'd grown irritated by the barking, the whining, the restless circles on hardwood floors. Through the window she saw the untouched groceries, the purse on the counter, a car still in the garage, things abandoned mid-motion, as if Emma had stepped out for a moment and dissolved into air. Police arrived within the hour. They walked the rooms with latex gloves and clipboard eyes, but the scene offered no violence. No broken locks, no smashed glass, no trail of blood. Only absence. Absence thick enough to choke on. Her family insisted Emma wouldn't vanish. Too organized, too tied to her image, too careful about appearances. A woman like her didn't go off-grid. Detectives nodded, wrote it down, but in their eyes was the flicker of a theory they'd voiced 100 times. Adults vanish by choice more often than force, but as hours turned to days, the theory cracked. Her credit cards froze. Her phone lay dead on the nightstand. Security cameras at the gated street entrance captured her return home with groceries at 6:42 p.m. The footage ended there. She never walked back out. By the second night, the search widened. Patrol cars combed the neighborhood. Floodlights cut across the woods at the property line. Dogs were brought in, noses pressed to fabric, tails rigid, pulling handlers in circles that yielded nothing. Detectives scoured the perimeter. Behind the townhouse, a chain-link fence sagged inward, as if bent by force. Mud bore the impression of a shoe, smeared and unhelpful. The scuff of rubber against pavement suggested a stumble. Clues, yes, but fragments, each one small enough to be explained away. Everyone wanted to help. Friends offered stories. Family opened their calendars. Neighbors rehearsed timelines. The picture they painted was clean, too clean, until the contradictions began to show. A brother whose alibi shifted by the hour. A colleague who mentioned details he shouldn't have known. A neighbor who swore she saw Emma the morning after her disappearance, though cameras said otherwise. The first 48 hours bled out like a wound no one could close, and through it all, the dog kept scratching at the door, scratching and whining until its paws left pale marks in the wood. Neighbors dismissed it as loyalty, police as nerves, but the sound carried a weight that no one wanted to name. The sound of something missing, something that should never have been allowed to slip away. The search would widen. The suspects would multiply. The cameras, the interviews, the ransom calls, all of it was waiting. But in those first hours, what mattered most was absence. Emma Whitfield was gone, and no one could explain why. The first sweep of an investigation always circles closest to the missing. Family, lovers, neighbors, colleagues, the people who live in the radius of a life, the ones with the strongest ties and the strongest reasons to lie. Emma Whitfield's circle was no different. On paper it gleamed, but paper is thin, and the closer detectives pressed, the more it tore. Emma's brother, Ryan Whitfield, was the first name underlined in reports. 35, a failed tech entrepreneur with a reputation for shortcuts and almosts. He lived 2 hours away, but financial records showed transfers between his empty accounts and Emma's healthy ones. Debt hung on him like a second skin. Maxed cards, creditors knocking, investments gone sour. When detectives asked about the night Emma vanished, his story changed like weather. First he was home working late. Then he was at a friend's apartment. Then he admitted to driving into the city but claimed he never reached her neighborhood. Each revision was offered with a smile too practiced, a calm too rehearsed. Emma's parents were quieter but not cleaner. Their wealth was old but eroded. Behind the stately estate and manicured lawns were mortgages leveraged against appearances. Emma had become the successful one, the polished Whitfield child. Her parents were proud, but pride curdles when mixed with dependence. Investigators noted tension in interviews, long pauses, evasive looks, as though they were guarding her image more than her memory. At Whitfield Luxury Properties, Emma's colleague Daniel Keene stood out. Mid-40s, divorced, a salesman with charm like cheap cologne, heavy, inescapable, always lingering longer than invited. Co-workers described him as devoted, even protective of Emma, but the devotion tipped into obsession. He had a habit of dropping by her open houses, of lingering after events, of commenting on her clothes, her clients, her smile. The night she vanished, his phone records placed him near her neighborhood, though he swore it was coincidence. He'd been driving through, a vague excuse detectives heard often enough to file under suspicion. His apartment search turned up nothing illegal, but his browser history carried red flags, missing person cases, basement soundproofing, GPS trackers. None of it proved anything, but it was enough to darken his shadow. On Emma's block, the most watchful was Margaret Doyle, a widow in her 60s 60s, whose curtains never seemed to close. She noticed everything and or claimed to. Her statements were contradictions stitched together with certainty. She swore she saw Emma watering plants the morning after she vanished, though timestamps showed Emma gone by then. Later she said she heard a car engine at midnight. Then it was footsteps. Then nothing. Detectives treated her like they often treat neighborhood witnesses. Half asset, half liability. People who see too much, hear too much, invent details to fill silence. But Margaret was also the one who first insisted the back gate had been tampered with. And when police checked, they found she was right. Emma's social media suggested she was single, but digital forensics scraped beneath the polished images and found late-night texts to a man named Alex Moreno, mid-30s, personal trainer, married with children. The kind of affair that had stakes heavy enough to bury. Moreno claimed the fling ended weeks before Emma's disappearance. His alibi placed him at home with his wife that night. But phone tower data betrayed him. His device pinged near Emma's neighborhood around the window of her vanishing. His wife backed his story anyway, her voice brittle, her eyes hard. Detectives noted it in their files. Spousal corroboration under strain. And then there were the investigators, not suspects, but characters in the story nonetheless. The lead was Detective Howard Raines, 20 years on the force, a man whose face looked carved from cigarettes and sleepless nights. He had a reputation for persistence, but also for cutting corners when cases dragged. His partner, Detective Marla Singh, was younger, sharper, detail-obsessed. She didn't trust easy theories, and she didn't trust Raines's shortcuts. Together, they formed the uneasy backbone of the case, one weary, one relentless. They combed the townhouse, retraced Emma's last steps, mapped out every person who touched her life. Each lead pulled them deeper into contradictions. Each interview gave them half-truths dressed as clarity. The investigation expanded, but instead of narrowing suspects, it multiplied them. Everyone close to Emma had a shadow. Everyone had something to hide, and still, the most damning fact hung unsolved. The last camera footage showed Emma entering her house with grocery bags at 6:42 p.m. No footage ever showed her leaving. Inside the station, that detail was circled, underlined, stared at until the ink bled through paper. If she never left, then where had she gone? The first week of a disappearance is never quiet. The phones don't stop ringing, and most of what comes through them is useless. In Emma Whitfield's case, the noise began on the fourth night. A woman in the next county swore she saw Emma at a roadside diner. She described the hair, the jacket, even the anxious way Emma stirred sugar into her coffee. Detectives drove out, pulled grainy footage from the diner's cameras, and wasted a day chasing a shadow. The woman in the video was blonde, yes, but 20 pounds heavier, and wearing a wedding band Emma never owned. The hours were gone, and Emma's trail was no warmer. On the sixth night, the precinct phone lit up with an anonymous tip. The voice was distorted, electronic, the kind of thing lifted from a crime drama. The caller claimed Emma was alive, held in a cabin off Highway 47. Raines sent a team. Flashlights sliced through empty trees, boots crunched over frost. They found a cabin, yes, but it was abandoned. No Emma, no signs of captivity, just broken furniture and animal droppings. The voice on the call was never traced. Some suspected it was a prankster feeding off headlines. Others wondered if it was meant as deliberate misdirection. Either way, it burned hours that could never be reclaimed. 2 days later, a ransom letter arrived in Emma's parents' mailbox. Block letters cut from magazines glued with precision. It demanded $500,000 in cash, left in a locker at Union Station. On its face, it looked authentic, the kind of thing that turned a disappearance into a kidnapping case. But Singh read it twice, frowned, and said it out loud. It feels rehearsed, like someone watched too many movies. Forensics backed her instinct. The glue was store-bought, the paper traced to common craft supplies. No fingerprints, no DNA. Clean, too clean. The family, terrified, wanted to pay. Raines advised against it. They staged a drop anyway, bills marked and agents waiting. No one came for the money. The locker stayed empty. The note was filed under false lid. By the 10th day, Emma's face was everywhere. News anchors called her the missing angel of luxury real estate. Tabloids devoured her social life, digging through boyfriends, business deals, family tensions. The media pressure cut both ways. Public tips poured in, most useless, some malicious. Every lead leaked to the press before it was vetted, forcing Raines and Singh to field questions they couldn't answer. When Singh ordered a second search of Emma's townhouse, cameras were waiting outside before her team even unpacked their kits. The investigation had become spectacle, and spectacle is the enemy of precision. The deeper they pushed, the more the case resisted clarity. Ryan Whitfield insisted he hadn't spoken to Emma in days. Phone records showed a late-night call hours before she vanished. Daniel Keene claimed he was driving home the night of her disappearance. Traffic cameras showed his car circling her block twice. Margaret Doyle swore she saw Emma's silhouette in the kitchen window the morning after. Detectives tested the angle of the glass, proved it was impossible from her vantage point. Alex Moreno maintained his affair with Emma was over. Her laptop search history told another story. Fitness routines, gym locations, his wife's name. Each suspect grew heavier under suspicion, and yet none of them tipped into certainty. Every clue was half-proof, every lead ended in contradiction. It was as if the case itself was mocking procedure. By the 2-week mark, the case was officially labeled Whitfield endangered. The file thickened, the board filled with photos, timelines, string connecting suspects like a spider's web, but each thread ended in air. The last known fact remained unchanged, unyielding. Emma Whitfield was seen entering her home at 6:42 p.m. carrying grocery bags. No camera, no witness, no record ever proved she walked back out. Somewhere between that doorframe and the next sunrise, she had vanished, and with each false lead, each wasted day, the chance of finding her alive thinned like smoke. The false leads had burned time, but science still had teeth. Forensics became the next hope. Emma's phone lay on her nightstand, dark. At first, detectives assumed she left it behind in haste, but a closer examination told a different story. Her last text, a half-written message to a contact labeled only A, was frozen in the drafts folder. It was time-stamped at 6:51 p.m., 9 minutes after she was seen entering her home. The text stopped mid-word, as if her hands were interrupted. Forensic software pulled fragments of deleted data. Among them, a voicemail file corrupted beyond playback, the title a jumble of static characters. Text tried to recover it, but the best they could salvage was a burst of sound, distorted breathing, a thump, then silence. Detective Singh insisted on rechecking the building's security feeds. Not just the street-facing cameras, but archived footage and storage. 2 days into combing the files, she spotted something others had missed. In the reflection of a glass pane across the street, faint, blurred, Emma's front door closed at 6:42 p.m. But the reflection also showed a shadow behind her. Not hers, taller, broader. It was proof someone else entered the house with her. But the reflection was too vague for identification, too distorted to hold up in court. A breadcrumb, not a chain. Lab reports flagged fibers pulled from the trunk of Daniel Keene's car. Synthetic, pale, consistent with the lining of Emma's winter coat. Alongside it, a single strand of hair that appeared to match her profile. Keene denied everything. Claimed she'd ridden in his car once after a company dinner. Claimed the coat fibers meant nothing. Defense lawyers circled it immediately. Transfer evidence. Inconclusive. It wasn't enough. Emma's laptop revealed another fracture. Browser history showed she'd searched Alex Moreno's name obsessively in the weeks before her disappearance. Fitness schedules, gym events, his wife's social profiles. Even a real estate listing 3 blocks from his home. It painted a picture of fixation, maybe desperation. Detectives debated whether she was the pursuer rather than the pursued. Moreno's wife denied knowing anything. His alibi still smelled of performance, but no evidence nailed him down. By week 3, the case was a political hazard. Emma's family had influence, old connections that leaned on the department for answers. Local officials whispered about reputations, about appearances. The mayor's office wanted a resolution, clean and swift. Detective Raines felt the pressure in the calls to his desk, the veiled suggestions that some suspects should be handled gently, particularly Ryan Whitfield. The family name still carried weight in financial circles. Evidence pointing his way was quietly filed, then shelved. Singh bristled. She wanted warrants, deeper digs, subpoenas. Instead, she was told to wait. One tip suggested Emma had been moved across state lines. The FBI briefly circled in, eager to take control. Jurisdiction arguments flared. Files duplicated, delayed, misplaced. Leads that should have been chased within hours stalled for days. By the time the question was resolved, the trail was cold. Whatever chance they had to follow the lead in real time was gone. When word of the ransom note hit the press, the case lost another layer of control. Reporters published photos of the note, dissected its wording, speculated on motives. Copycats flooded the tip line, each letter more theatrical than the last. Real evidence drowned beneath the noise. Detectives spent hours sifting through false trails while Emma's real trail withered. The strain cracked the team itself. Raines leaned toward easy suspects. Keene, Moreno, the obvious players. Singh refused to settle. She pressed for re-examinations, forensics, re-interviews. Their notes showed the split in tone. His reports were clipped, procedural. Hers ran long, full of questions unanswered. She didn't believe in coincidences, and nothing about Emma's disappearance fit cleanly. But cases don't wait for consensus. Time kept moving. The evidence board in the precinct told the story better than words. Emma at the center, lines radiating outward. Ryan, Keene, Thomas, Moreno, dozens of arrows, photos, scraps of notes. The board looked full, heavy, ready to collapse under its own weight, and yet it was hollow. Each thread contradicted the next. Each clue stopped short of proof. Emma Whitfield had been gone nearly a month, and the investigation was suffocating under its own noise. For weeks, the investigation had been noise, interviews, press releases, scraps of forensics that refused to align. But cases don't stay static. They either collapse or evolve. Emma's case began to move again, not in leaps but in slivers. An evidence tech cataloging Emma's purse, found in her bedroom, had missed a slip of paper tucked deep in the lining. A train stub, purchased 2 days before her disappearance. One way, destination, Ashford, a town 2 hours north. The ticket had never been used. CCTV from the station showed no trace of Emma. No entry logs, no face in the crowd. Why would she buy a ticket she never used? Was she planning to leave someone behind? Or had someone staged it, a breadcrumb meant to confuse? The stub went on the board, another dangling thread. Digital forensics revisited Emma's phone, determined to untangle the corrupted voicemail. Hours of audio reconstruction yielded clearer fragments. fragments. The recovered sound was chilling in its incompleteness. The faint creak of floorboards, a muffled gasp, a low male voice saying something indecipherable. Then, a hollow thud, as if the phone struck the ground. Experts cleaned the audio, but the voice never sharpened enough to match a suspect. Still, it confirmed what detectives suspected. Emma had been taken inside her home. The walls had heard her vanish. The house had kept its silence. Singh's obsession with the CCTV reflection grew. She had it enhanced frame by frame, pixel by pixel, and there it was, faint, almost ghost-like. Not just a figure behind Emma, a hand, pressed against the doorframe as she stepped inside. Large, gloved. It didn't prove identity, but it proved presence. Someone else had entered with her. Someone who knew the camera angles, who slipped in behind her as if the house itself swallowed them whole. 3 weeks after Emma vanished, a local handyman, Thomas, came forward, nervous, apologetic. He said he'd been near the Whitfield home the night of the disappearance, fixing a neighbor's wiring. Around dusk, he claimed, he'd seen a man leaving the Whitfield driveway. Not Ryan, not Daniel Keene, someone else. A broad figure in a hooded jacket, head down, moving quickly. He hadn't spoken earlier, he said, because his work papers weren't legal. He feared deportation. Now guilt weighed heavier than fear, but memory is fickle. Under questioning, his description shifted. Height, weight, color of the jacket, all blurred. Enough to seed suspicion, not enough to stand on. An analyst double-checking Emma's credit card logs flagged a charge at a hardware store the morning of her disappearance. Rope, duct tape, a padlock. The purchase was clean, paid with her card, signed with her name. Surveillance cameras showed the back of a woman's head at the register, hair blonde like Emma's. But frame by frame, doubt surfaced. The woman never turned fully toward the lens. Her posture was stiffer, her movements sharper, almost as if someone had dressed to mimic Emma. A blonde wig, her stolen card, her forged signature. It was a performance, not a purchase. Each new breadcrumb twisted the case tighter. Emma hadn't vanished into thin air. She had been studied, stalked, surrounded by layers of deception. Someone close enough to her life to forge her habits, close enough to her home to slip inside without trace. But each breadcrumb also dissolved on contact. Train tickets that led nowhere. Receipts staged to mislead. Witnesses too afraid to speak until memory blurred. Detectives could feel the walls tightening. They were circling something, or someone, but the circle never closed. The Whitfield home grew quieter with each week, but not empty. Flowers wilted on the porch. Reporters thinned, but a few still lingered, hungry for the case that wouldn't die. And always the dog, still scratching at the door, still whining in the night. Most dismissed it as grief. Only Singh noted how it always scratched at the same place, the same section of wall, but she didn't voice it yet. Not then, not when the case was so close to slipping entirely out of their hands. The case had dragged for more than a month, files stacked into thick binders. The board sagged under photographs, timelines, names, red yarn crossing in angry diagonals. Detectives lived inside the case, breathing it, suffocating on it. And then, the breaks began to come. Not cleanly, not all at once, but in fractured bursts, like cracks in a frozen lake. On the 36th day, a phone tech working late pulled a ghost signal. Emma's secondary phone, one she kept only for banking alerts and rarely used, pinged off a dormant cell tower 15 miles west of the city. The tower hadn't logged activity in weeks. The ping was brief, a blip of life in static. By the time a team was dispatched, the phone had gone dark again. The search zone was rural, thick with abandoned barns and outbuildings. Officers combed fields with floodlights, dogs straining against leashes. They found footprints, tire marks, even a cigarette still warm near a tree line. But no phone, no Emma. Whoever had turned it on had turned it off just as quickly, like bait dangled and then yanked away. Detective Singh's persistence on digital forensics finally paid. A mislabeled archive from a city surveillance server was unearthed. Footage no one had reviewed because it had been tagged under the wrong street name. At ICI, 2:40 p.m. the night of Emma's disappearance, the file showed a dark van idling 2 blocks from her house. Lights off, driver unseen. At 6:55, headlights flared. The van rolled forward, turned down her street, and then nothing. The angle cut off before it reached her driveway. The timestamp matched the exact window Emma's unfinished text froze on her phone. It was the closest thing to a timeline they'd ever had. Proof of a vehicle, proof of coordination, still no plate. No ID, just another ghost on film. Then came the lab call that made Rain sit up straight. The fiber snagged on Emma's front door frame, tiny, pale, synthetic, came back with a match. The database identified it as consistent with industrial work gloves, the kind issued to employees at Thomas's company. Thomas, the handyman who'd first stepped into the case with his shifting story and his too-neat alibi, was back on the board in thick black marker. A warrant followed. His car was torn apart, his home scoured. In the trunk of a rusting work van, investigators lifted a smear of blood invisible to the naked eye. DNA rushed through the system. It matched Emma. For a moment, the case seemed solved. Thomas had motive, opportunity, forensic trace. Detectives tasted the endgame. They imagined press conferences, families with folded hands, justice delivered. But Thomas didn't break. He sat in interrogation, silent, eyes dead. His lawyer did the talking. Contamination, mishandling, profiling, transfer evidence, and then came the hammer. A defense-hired expert cast doubt on the lab's chain of custody, claimed the fiber could have come from 1,000 sources, that the blood sample was too small, too degraded for certainty. A judge agreed. The evidence was weakened, inadmissible for trial. Thomas walked free pending further proof. The public saw a suspect. The court saw a shadow. The case returned to its grind. Singh, stubborn, revisited the Whitfield house yet again. By now it was nearly empty. Ryan had moved into a hotel. Family drifted away. The house smelled of dust and old flowers. She walked room by room, hands brushing walls, eyes scanning corners already scoured dozens of times. And that was when she noticed it. A section of basement paneling, painted the same as the wall, but newer. The dog had clawed at it so often the paint had begun to flake. She marked it in her notes. A small thing, an irregularity. The dog had clawed it so often the paint had begun to flake. She planned to return with a warrant, but she never got the chance. Because by then, the case file had grown too poisoned, too political, too exhausted. Her request was denied. The house has been cleared, supervisors insisted. They had Thomas to chase, media to placate, careers to protect. The panel remained unopened. The breakthroughs piled like stones. The GPS ping, the van footage, the DNA trace, the basement panel, each one heavy enough to pull the case forward. Each one slipping just out of grasp. Emma Whitfield was everywhere in evidence, yet nowhere in resolution. Her presence haunted the board, haunted the files, haunted the men and women who chased her shadow. And through it all, the dog kept scratching. The case file closed not with a bang, but with a stamp. Unsolved. Detectives boxed their notes, archived their photographs. The board with Emma's face at its center was dismantled. Pins and string pulled away like veins stripped from a body. Media moved on. Politicians stopped returning calls. Even the Whitfield family, worn thin by grief and scandal, drifted into silence. Emma Whitfield had become a name without an ending, a face on old flyers. A question mark. The Whitfield home was sold. Its halls were repainted, its furniture replaced. Strangers moved in, walking floors that had been combed by investigators, sleeping in rooms still heavy with history. Life went on, indifferent. Years passed. Dust gathered on the case like it had on her memory, until one afternoon, when a renovation crew tore into the basement wall, the hammer struck plaster. The sound rang hollow. A second blow split the panel, releasing a stench that stopped men in their tracks. They pulled the wall apart and froze at what was inside. A cot, rusted chains, an empty water jug, and the body of Emma Whitfield, curled against the concrete, still in the coat she'd worn the night she vanished. She had never left the house, not once. While officers scoured highways, while suspects were paraded in and out of interrogation rooms, while reporters chased sightings across state lines, Emma was here, beneath their feet, breathing in darkness, scratching at walls that no one opened. The discovery ripped the city open again. The case, once boxed and buried, roared back to life. Evidence re-examined, interviews replayed, timelines redrawn, and there it was, hiding in plain sight. The false wall had been built during a renovation project, helped along by a man no one had truly suspected. Daniel Keene, the co-worker, the quiet man in the background, the one Emma had once shown kindness to, who mistook it for something deeper, who turned rejection into rage. He had stood with investigators at candlelight vigils. He had spoken Emma's name with practiced grief. All the while, he alone knew the truth. She was still in the house. The police hadn't solved the mystery. Time had, accident had. Too late for Emma, too late for justice. And in the silence of that final discovery, neighbors remembered something they had ignored. The sound of a dog, night after night, scratching at the basement wall. The only one who had ever truly known where she was.